I'm also glad that Sua pointed out some of the positive things that are going on. I think it's really interesting that he highlighted that he's really liking what he's seeing from the strength and conditioning coach, because obviously that was a very recent hire. So USC football fans don't really know too much about what's gone on since USC hired Trumain Carroll and what kind of job he's been doing, since it was just a couple of months ago now that he was hired. So I think it's a really positive sign that Sua Cravens called him out specifically and was like, what Trumain Carroll is doing is good so far. He's setting a new physical standard. This was the good move that USC needed to make in that department. So I'm really encouraged about that. The stuff about the front office and the recruiting fences, things that all of us fans know. So it's not, nothing crazy revelatory there. But then he makes a really bold statement there at the bottom: double-digit wins the next 2 seasons, which means he's, decently confident in USC's ability this season, which, they don't have the strongest schedule, and they have some decent returning players at key positions. So I don't see it as entirely impossible that they achieve that. But it's still kind of a bold take, considering it's a team that just went 7-6 and, hasn't won double-digit wins in a couple of years and hasn't gotten to double-digit wins consistently in quite a while. So I think it's a bold take, but, obviously a take that USC fans will be excited about. So, and, make their first playoff appearance as well. He seems pretty confident that that's going to happen. So I hope that all of that comes true. Obviously, every USC fan hopes that comes true, but a couple little interesting bits of insight there from Sua, I think. So, yeah, with the strength and conditioning coach being the main one, I'm glad that he thinks that that's going well.
Yeah, I mean, like that, again, lots of layers here. It really is interesting that Sua Cravens would focus on the new strength of conditioning coach, setting a new standard. I mean, he's not even 2 months into his job. He is just getting started, and it just strikes me. Not to say or imply that Sua Cravens is wrong in any way, that what he's seeing, what he's hearing, is not somehow legitimate, but it is just interesting to make that strong an observation this early in the game. I mean, don't we need to see preseason camp? Again, not saying that Sua is wrong, but just, wow, that's an early call, right? It's like saying that, Pennsylvania is going to the Democrat at 10:30 on election night. That's an early call, right? Don't you want to wait until you get more precincts reporting, right? So it's just striking how early a declaration this is. Again, it could be right, but we need to see camp. We need to see how this team goes through games, and Missouri State, Georgia Southern, probably not going to learn a ton from those 2 games. Getting into the Big Ten, and specifically getting into Big Ten road games in September, which of course was the thing that tripped up USC most centrally last season. Let's see where we are in late September, early October, as kind of our first real measuring stick for where Trumain Carroll has this team in terms of strength, durability, resilience, stamina, all those things. I mean, hey, no one needs to tell me, of all people, that I'm thrilled that Trumain Carroll's here, because it means Benny Wiley is out of here, which is something that I was wanting for a very long time. It's and I've said, Ethan, on our show several weeks ago, I'm sold on Trumain Carroll. I believe in Coach Carroll at USC. And of course, how can you not trust Coach Carroll at USC? It's just all too perfect. But really, no, I mean, Kansas State is a skull crusher program, not in terms of being number 1, but in terms of punch you in the mouth, right? Physical, hit you hard. That's how they play. That's how they roll. They've done really well. So his credentials, his identity, I'm sold. I'm a believer, but I do need to see it on the field. And the other thing is, even if Trumain Carroll really is the guy, and I do think he is, this still feels like an in-between type season. And I do think, again, that he was brought aboard now, not so much for 2025, though of course he is, he's going to be part of this operation in 2025. But I really think that he was hired when he was, so that he can lay a foundation, establish a standard, a modus operandi that leads into 2026, so that that number one recruiting class can see what's going on, can see how it's being done. Like, they didn't want a holdover and someone who represented mediocrity and stagnation. They, get the right guy in, so that the number one recruiting class can see how this guy goes about his business, and then the veterans in the locker room can kind of hand down the nuances of Trumain Carroll's new strength and conditioning program to the incoming freshmen, the incoming recruits. I think that was a big part of the thought process from Chad Bowden and Lincoln Riley when they made that move. So, like, how much Trumain Carroll can actually achieve in specifically for the 2025 season alone, he could be the guy, and yet we still might not see the full results on the field. And I think that's going to be one of the really delicate and difficult conversations about 2025 USC football, Ethan. It's that this is an in-between year. The needle is definitely going in the right direction, but really 2026 is where the real energy and the optimism and the vibe shift are all truly happening. It's not really about this year's team. And so we have to go to the reminder into the past that in 2001, Pete Carroll very much did turn around USC, but it was the beginning of the turnaround. The beginning of the turnaround was in 2001, when the culture, the identity, the attitude, the approach, they all did change, but only as a table setter for 2002, the breakout year. So, like, that to me, Ethan, is really the difficult conversation at USC right now. It's that the results in 2025 might not be great, and we have to be savvy enough to be able to see whether the culture really is changing, providing that springboard for 2026, or whether it's Lincoln Riley not making the grade and continuing to hold this program back.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that, your note about it's a really early claim to make for sure about the strength coach, but I think also you mentioned something there about kind of the culture, and even if this season isn't the results-oriented season, it is a season where the culture needs to start being set. And so that's what makes me think that it's a good sign that Sua is saying this, because the results may not show up like you said, but if Sua feels like there's at least a culture and an expectation that's being set this early, which I don't think it's crazy to say, when you hire a new coach, you want them to come and start implementing their new culture on day one. The players aren't going to change on day one, but you want the coach to start facilitating that change on day one. And that's something that I do a lot of coverage for the Raiders for the other site that I write for. And there's a lot of talk about how Pete Carroll has immediately stepped in and changed the culture there. And that's another thing, kind of similar thing, to Coach Carroll's changing the culture. But even though, people aren't expecting the Raiders to be Super Bowl contenders the minute that Pete Carroll steps into the building, they still, what they are expecting is for him to kind of bring that positive energy and that, very signature Pete Carroll energy that he's always brought to the sideline on day one. So I think that that's something that, we should watch for. Is it may not be consistent and it may not be, to the standard that USC fans want to see, but I think, pay close attention to how players celebrate their big physical wins. Like if Jamal Jarrett or Jakeem Stewart makes like a big exciting play on the defensive line, and then they go and celebrate with Trumain Carroll, and it's clear that they're celebrating those big physical wins, that's something positive, and that's the culture setting that we want to see. So I'd pay a little bit of attention to that for sure.
One other little layer to add here is that, I said that, in late September, when USC goes on the road in the Big Ten, we'll begin to get a sense of where this team is going, and perhaps we might get our first glimpses of how rugged and physically robust USC might be in the Big Ten, and whether Trumain Carroll's new regimen is making a real difference. I think the other point to stack on top of that is injuries. And it's really interesting that The injuries began to hit USC last season precisely when it got into the Big Ten schedule. You know, the Michigan game, the Wisconsin game, the Minnesota game, there was a tidal wave of injuries. Eric Gentry out against Wisconsin. Anthony Lucas out in the second half against Minnesota. Minnesota's offense got better right after Anthony Lucas got hurt in that particular game. So, like, it was obvious that those were the linchpins. Those were the key foundational pieces of that defense, and USC plainly did not have the elite depth needed to withstand those particular losses. So another measurement of Trumain Carroll, and again, I'm not going to hold him to an extremely high standard this season because, again, he's putting things in place. Like, you have to give, for a strength and conditioning coach, you have to give him at least a couple years to measure what he's been able to do. Like we saw with Benny Wiley that he wasn't cutting it. Like Benny Wiley had been with Lincoln Riley for several seasons. So like that ship had sailed, like that story had run its course. Like I had seen enough. I had seen all I needed to see. But with Trumain Carroll, you have to give him some runway. You have to give him an on-ramp to really see what he's capable of. So I'm not going to judge him too harshly if this season doesn't hit all the marks. But just in terms of trying to make the measurement of Trumain Carroll, if this team does get hit by injuries, how the depth pieces are able to step up, and particularly in terms of run defense, and particularly in terms of filling the middle and doing the kinds of no glory things that you need on a football team and you need on a defense, like that would be the next measurement. So it's not just getting into the Big Ten schedule, particularly in Big Ten road games, and particularly in colder weather as we go along late in the season. We also just have to ask the question, if there are injuries, are the next guys going to be ready to punch up? Are they going to be able to hold their weight in the arena? Are they going to be able to stand strong, tough, and tall? That will be another measurement for Trumain Carroll in his first year at USC.
I think I remembered my other thought, Matt, which was just that.
I hope I gave you enough time with that answer. Yeah, good.
Which is just that if you want to keep an eye on Trumain Carroll's development this year, definitely keep an eye on Jakeem Stewart. He's kind of, USC's big 5-star prospect this year, kind of the darling of the 2025 class, the guy that is, it's not like we have nobody in this 2025 class and we're waiting and everybody's in the 2026 class. He's kind of the guy in the 2025 class that will kind of keep us excited and hold us over until those 2026 guys come in. But I mean, he's 6'6", 270 pounds. We've already seen him working out with Aaron Donald through the Coach Henny connection. So if you want to, kind of psychoanalyze Trumain Carroll's development a little early, because as I know USC fans love to jump to judgments as soon as they possibly can. But if that's what you want to keep your eye on, then just focus in on Jakeem Stewart, because he's kind of the main key guy that the development really matters for. Obviously, some of these upperclassmen, keeping them on the field, that's another important thing, like you mentioned with the injuries. But in terms of development specifically, keep your eye on Jakeem Stewart for sure.